There is something deeply unsettling about budget motels that nobody ever talks about. Not in the advertisements, not in the travel guides, not in the cheerful little cards sitting on the nightstand next to the remote control and the tiny bottle of shampoo that smells like artificial lavender. Nobody talks about what actually waits behind those thin walls, underneath those stiff sheets, inside those corridors that stretch just a little too long and stay just a little too quiet at 3 in the morning. Budget motels are everywhere. They sit off highway exits like forgotten sentinels, their vacancy signs glowing orange or red against the dark sky, their parking lots half empty, their vending machines humming in the silence. You have driven past hundreds of them. You may have stayed in dozens. Most of the time, nothing happens. You check in. You sleep on a mattress that is slightly too firm or slightly too soft. You wake up groggy. You drink bad coffee from a machine in the lobby, and you leave. That is the experience the vast majority of people have. Completely ordinary, completely forgettable, but not always. Some people check into budget motels and have experiences they spend years trying to explain. Experiences that do not fit into any rational framework, no matter how hard they try to force them in. Experiences that follow them home, that creep into their dreams, that make them flinch every time they pass a motel sign on the highway. Today, we have 3 of those stories. 3 real accounts from 3 real people who stayed in budget motels and encountered something they cannot explain. Names have been changed or withheld at the request of the individuals involved. Some locations have been partially obscured for legal and privacy reasons. But the core of every story you're about to hear is true. Let us begin. The first story comes from a man named Marcus. Marcus was a long-haul truck driver with 14 years of experience when this happened to him. He had driven through 47 states. He had slept in hundreds of motels, rest stops, and truck stops across the country. He was not a superstitious man. He did not believe in ghosts or the paranormal or anything that could not be explained by physics, psychology, and common sense. He was practical. He was experienced. He was steady. And he was absolutely not prepared for what happened to him on a Tuesday night in late October in rural Tennessee. Marcus had been driving for 11 hours. He knew better than to push past the point of exhaustion because he had seen too many of his colleagues make that mistake and pay for it with their rigs wrapped around guardrails. When his eyes started blurring and the white highway lines started merging into one continuous streak, he pulled off at the next exit. It was a dark night. Heavy cloud cover had swallowed every star. The temperature was dropping fast, and there was a smell in the air that promised rain before morning. He spotted the sign almost immediately after pulling off the highway. Blue Pine Motor Inn, vacancy, $49 a night. It was a single-story L-shaped building, the kind that had probably been constructed in the early 1960s and had been running on inertia ever since. The exterior lights were mostly functional. The office had a lamp burning inside. There was one other car in the lot, a beat-up sedan parked near the far end. Marcus went inside and paid cash because he always paid cash, an old habit he had developed over years of travel. The night clerk, a heavy-set man in his 50s who introduced himself as Dale, slid a key across the desk without much ceremony. "Room 9, Dale said. "End of the row. Quite a spot we have." Marcus thanked him, drove his truck around to the side of the building, grabbed his overnight bag and his worn paperback novel and unlocked the door to room 9. The room was exactly what he expected. 2 double beds, a table with 2 chairs, an old television bolted to a dresser, curtains that were slightly too short for the window, and carpet that had been through things he preferred not to think about. He did not care. He had slept in worse. He took a quick shower, changed into clean clothes, got into the bed nearest the door, and opened his book. He read for approximately 20 minutes. Then he heard the knock, not at the door, at the wall. The wall that separated room 9 from room 8. 3 knocks, slow, deliberate, evenly spaced, like someone knocking on a door, except there was no door in that wall. Just drywall and old paint, and a framed print of a mountain landscape hanging slightly off-center. Marcus lowered his book and listened. Silence followed. He figured it was another guest bumping around, maybe moving furniture, or stumbling to the bathroom in the dark. Old buildings made strange sounds, and he knew that walls and pipes and beams could carry sounds from surprising distances. He went back to his book. Then the knocking came again. 3 knocks, same rhythm, same pace. Slow and deliberate and patient. Marcus set his book down entirely. He looked at the wall. He waited. Nothing. He picked his book back up. And then he heard the voice. It was soft, almost too soft to distinguish over the noise of the heating unit, which was running at a steady, low rumble. But it was clearly coming from the other side of the wall. A woman's voice. She was saying something. He could not make out the words at first, only the rhythm of them. And it sounded like she was repeating the same phrase over and over. Marcus turned off the heating unit. In the sudden silence, her voice became clearer, still muffled by the wall between them, but clear enough now to understand. She was saying, "Please come in, please come in, please come in," over and over, the same 3 words. Flat, toneless, completely without emotion, like a recording playing on an endless loop. No urgency in it, no distress, no warmth. Just those 3 words repeated in a voice that had learned the sounds but not the feeling behind them. Every hair on Marcus's arm stood up. He was not easily frightened. He had broken up fights at truck stops. He had driven through actual tornadoes. He had once performed improvised first aid on a stranger at the side of a highway. But something about that voice made his skin go cold in a way he had never felt before, and has never fully been able to describe to anyone since. His first instinct was to check on her. Maybe she was having a medical episode. Maybe she was sleepwalking or confused or in some kind of distress that was expressing itself strangely. His second instinct was to call the front desk and let Dale handle it. He went with his second instinct. He picked up the room phone and dialed 0. Dale picked up on the second ring. "Everything okay in 9?" Dale asked. "Yeah," Marcus said, keeping his voice low. "I think there might be something going on in room 8. There is a woman knocking on the wall and repeating something. I just wanted to make sure she's okay." There was a pause on the line. A pause that went on slightly too long. "Room 8, Dale said slowly, "is unoccupied." Marcus looked at the wall. "There is nobody in room 8, Dale said. "Has been empty all week. Tonight we only have you and a couple in room 2. Marcus kept looking at the wall. The voice had stopped. "Are you sure?" Marcus asked. "Positive," Dale said. "Do you want me to come down and take a look?" Marcus thought about it. He thought about that flat, emotionless voice. He thought about the empty room. "No," he said. "I'm good." "Thanks, Dale." He hung up. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the wall for a long time. Then he got up, put his shoes back on, repacked his overnight bag, and walked out to his truck. He drove back onto the highway and kept going for 2 more hours until he found a 24-hour diner where he sat under fluorescent lights and drank coffee until the sun came up. He never went back to the Blue Pine Motor Inn. He told this story for the first time about 4 years after it happened to his brother-in-law at a family gathering. His brother-in-law, a man named Terence, who ran a paranormal research blog, asked if he could investigate further. Marcus agreed on the condition that his name and the precise location of the motel remain private. Terence drove out to the Blue Pine Motor Inn himself. He checked in and specifically requested room 9. Dale looked at him for a long moment when he made that request. Any particular reason? Dale asked. Terence said he had heard it was the quietest spot. Dale nodded slowly and slid the key across. Terence set up a digital audio recorder on the nightstand and sat in room 9 from 9 in the evening until 3 in the morning. For the first 4 hours, nothing happened. A car pulled into the lot around 11 and left 20 minutes later. The vending machine in the corridor made a sound like a cough around midnight. Then at 1:17 in the morning, while Terence had stepped briefly into the bathroom, his recorder picked up something. He discovered it the next morning while reviewing the audio in his car before driving home. At 1:17, on the recording, there are 3 distinct sounds. Rhythmic, evenly spaced, coming from the direction of the wall between rooms 9 and 8. Knocking. Terence published his findings on his blog. He was careful and precise and honest. He wrote that he could not say with certainty what he had recorded. He could not rule out that the sound traveled through the walls from some other source. He could not rule out that it was produced by a pipe or a beam or some mechanical element of the old building. What he could say was that after 11 years of conducting paranormal research, the recording from room 9 was one of only 3 recordings in his entire archive that he had been genuinely unable to explain with any conventional reasoning. He went back 18 months later and requested room 9 again. Dale told him room 9 was unavailable. He asked for room 8. Dale told him room 8 was closed. Maintenance issue. Terence took room 7 and sat up all night. His recorder picked up nothing. In the morning, when he went to check out, he noticed something in the corridor outside room 8. A small square of lighter colored paint on the wall beside the door. The kind of square that appears when a sign or plaque or number has been removed. The paint underneath, protected from years of light and dust, slightly different from the surrounding wall. The room number had been taken down. Whether recently or long ago, Terence could not determine. But there was no longer a room 8 at the Blue Pine Motor Inn. Now, here is the detail that Marcus shared years later when Terence followed up with him a second time. The detail that Marcus says still stays with him more than anything else about that night. He had been lying in the dark some months after it happened, turning it over in his mind the way you do with things that will not let go of you. And he realized something about the words he had heard through that wall. "Please come in." She was not asking him to come into her room. She was knocking on his wall. She was standing in that unoccupied room 8 and knocking on the wall between them and saying, "Please come in." She was not inviting him into her space. She was asking him to let her into his. Marcus still thanks whatever he believes in that he did not open that door. He drove away instead, and he has never once wished he had stayed. That is story one. Now we move to something different. Something that happened not to a lone traveler on a dark highway, but to two people who were supposed to be at the beginning of the happiest chapter of their lives. Jamie and Cora got married on a Saturday in June. They were 26 and 24 years old. Jamie worked in IT. Cora was a dental hygienist. They had been together for 5 years and engaged for 8 months. Their wedding was small and warm and genuinely joyful. 30 guests in a rented barn outside of town with a DJ who did a wonderful job. They had planned a road trip honeymoon, Tennessee to Georgia, a week of driving, stopping at places they had always wanted to see, eating at roadside diners, being easy and free, and newly married on a summer road with no particular schedule. But 6 weeks before the wedding, Cora's car needed a new transmission, and Jamie's hours at work got cut. And when they sat down to look at what they had actually saved for the honeymoon, the number was not what they needed it to be. They could not afford a resort. They could not afford to fly anywhere. What they could afford was the road trip done cheaply, with motel rooms booked along the way at whatever rates they could find. On the second night of their trip, the motel they had booked in a small Georgia town called them. While they were already on the road, a pipe had burst. All reservations were cancelled. They were left with no room and no backup plan. Driving south through the early evening heat, searching their phones for alternatives. That is how they found the Desert Star Motel. $42 a night, outdoor pool, free continental breakfast, 11 reviews on the booking site, 8 positive, 2 mixed, and 1 that said simply, "Do not stay here if you value your peace of mind." Jamie showed Cora that last review. She laughed. "Every motel has one of those," she said. "Some people are just dramatic." He agreed. They called and booked room 12. They arrived at 7:30 in the evening. The Desert Star was a 2-story property, rooms in a single long straight line, ground floor doors opening directly to the parking lot, upper floor rooms behind a railed walkway. There was a pool as advertised, though it was closed and covered with a tarp. The office was staffed by a young woman with long dark hair who checked them in without making eye contact and handed over 2 key cards without a word. Room 12 was 2/3 of the way down the ground floor row. They unlocked it and went inside. They ordered pizza. They watched television. They were happy and tired and newly married, and they fell asleep around 10. Cora woke at 2:47 in the morning. She did not know what woke her. She lay still for a moment, processing the unfamiliar ceiling and sounds, and the weight of Jamie sleeping beside her. Then she realized the television was on. The screen was glowing. Something was playing on it. The sound very low, almost inaudible. She reached for the remote and pressed the power button. Nothing happened. She pressed it again. Still nothing. She sat up and tried to focus on what was on the screen. It was a hallway, just a corridor, shot from what appeared to be a security camera, based on the angle and the slightly grainy quality of the image. A motel corridor, fluorescent lit, doors on either side, completely still. Nothing moving in it. No people, no motion, no change. Just the corridor, going nowhere, perfectly frozen. She pressed the remote buttons several more times. Nothing. She shook Jamie awake. He looked at the screen, tried the remote, got up, walked to the television, pressed the power button on the set itself. The screen went dark. Probably a timer, he told her. Someone programmed it to turn on at a certain hour. I have had that happen before. He got back into bed and told her to go back to sleep. She lay down. She closed her eyes. She listened to Jamie's breathing slow back into sleep. She did not sleep because she was looking at the wall across the room. The television was off and the screen was properly dark, but there was a faint glow on the wall. Not from the television, from behind it, from somewhere inside the wall itself, seeping around the edges of where the set sat in its bracket. The color of it was the color of a fluorescent tube, cold and white and perfectly steady, as if there was something behind the wall that was lit from within. She stared at it for a long time. Then she pulled the covers over her head and kept them there until morning. In the daylight, the wall looked completely normal. No glow, no sign of anything unusual. The television came on immediately when Jamie turned it on to check the weather. Cora told him what she had seen. He looked at the wall, looked behind the television as best he could given the bracket mounting, saw nothing. Old wiring, he said. These places have crazy old electrical systems. Probably a fixture behind the drywall that was never properly disconnected. They packed up, went for the continental breakfast, which was stale and weak and thoroughly unimpressive, and signed out. They were the only people in the breakfast area. Not another guest in sight. As they were pulling out of the lot, Cora looked back at the motel. She looked at the window of room 12. There was someone standing in it, a figure, just inside the glass. She could not make out any features because of the angle of the morning light hitting the window, but the shape was unmistakably human, standing completely still, watching them leave. "Jamie," she said. He was focused on pulling onto the road. "Yeah, someone is standing in our room." He glanced back. "Housekeeping," he said. "They come in early." She kept watching as they pulled away. The figure did not move, did not bend to strip the bed or turn to start cleaning. Just stood, just watched, until they turned onto the road and the motel disappeared behind a row of pine trees. That night, in a different motel further down their route, Cora was scrolling through the photos she had taken over the first 2 days of the trip. The wedding venue the morning after, the first sunrise of their married life through her diner window, the highway, the little roadside place where they had the best sweet tea either of them had ever tasted. Then she reached the photos from the Desert Star. She had taken a few exterior shots when they arrived. The sign, the building, just casual documentation. She scrolled through them, and then she stopped. In the photo of the exterior, taken from the parking lot with the whole building in frame, there was something in the window of room 12. A figure, standing in the window. She had not been looking at room 12 when she took the photo. She had been pointing at the sign, getting the whole building in frame. But there it was. A shape, clearly human, standing in the window of the room they had not yet checked into. A room that, when that photo was taken, should have been empty. She showed Jamie immediately. He stared at the photo for a long time. He zoomed in. He tilted the phone. He looked at it from different angles, the way people do when they are trying to make something be something other than what it appears to be. He could not make it be anything else. They spent the rest of the honeymoon talking about rational explanations. A previous guest who had not yet checked out. A housekeeper who had gone in early, a trick of the glass, a reflection from somewhere, a smear or mark that only looked like a person from a certain angle. They talked themselves into almost believing each of these explanations at various points over the remaining 5 days of the trip. But Cora would later say, and she has said this multiple times to multiple people in the years since, that none of those explanations could account for one specific detail she noticed when she finally enlarged the photo properly on a computer screen months after returning home. The figure in the window was not facing outward. It was not standing at the glass looking out at the parking lot. It was standing slightly back from the glass, facing the room, facing the beds, facing the interior of the space where Jamie and Cora would spend the night. Waiting for them to arrive, Jamie and Cora never returned to the Desert Star. They never spoke to anyone at the property about what they had experienced. They never filed a report or made a complaint because they could not figure out what they would even say. There was a figure in our window before we checked in. There was a glow in our wall. The television turned on by itself and showed us a corridor that looked like the one outside our room. None of that adds up to anything you can put in a formal complaint and expect to be taken seriously. They posted about it online eventually, in a forum dedicated to unexplained experiences. The post got a lot of responses. Most were from people sharing similar stories about budget motel televisions turning on in the middle of the night, which is apparently more common than you would expect, and which most people attribute to cross signals from remote controls in neighboring rooms. A few responses were less easy to rationalize. 3 separate people replied saying they had stayed at a motel matching the description of the Desert Star and had experienced something similar. One of them, a woman who identified herself only as a frequent business traveler from Atlanta, wrote that she had stayed at a motel in rural Georgia where the television had turned on in the middle of the night, showing what she described as security camera footage of a hallway. She had assumed it was some kind of closed circuit feed being broadcast on a local channel. She had turned it off and thought nothing more of it until she read Cora's post. Another reply came from a man who said he had stayed at what he believed to be the same property 2 years before Jamie and Cora's honeymoon. He said nothing unusual happened during his stay, but that when he got home and developed his film, because he still used a film camera for personal travel, one of the photos he had taken of the exterior showed something in a ground floor window that he had not seen when he took the picture. He did not describe it in detail in the forum post. He just said it was the reason he no longer used that particular stretch of road when driving through Georgia. The Desert Star Motel currently has 41 reviews on the most popular budget travel booking site. The average rating is 2.3 stars. 4 of those reviews, posted by different people in different years, mention the television turning on in the middle of the night. 2 mention a strange light or glow coming from the wall behind the television. One reviewer, who stayed in a ground floor room, wrote that she woke up at approximately 3 in the morning to find the television on and showing what she thought was a local channel broadcasting security footage. She wrote that she found it unsettling enough to sleep with the lights on for the remainder of the night. The Desert Star Motel is still operating. It is still listed on multiple booking sites. It still offers rooms at rates well below the regional average. We reached out for comment. We received no response. Now, we come to story 3. This one is different from the first two in ways that matter. Marcus's story is about something that seemed to want to get in. Jamie and Cora's story is about something that was already there, already waiting, patient and still in a window before they even arrived. Story 3 is about something that did not want to be seen at all. Something that went to very deliberate lengths to make sure it was not noticed. And it was almost successful. The person at the center of this story is a woman named Diane. She was 41 years old at the time this happened. She was a social worker who had spent 15 years working with families in crisis in a mid-sized city in the American Midwest. She was thoughtful, observant, and as she herself points out, professionally trained to notice details about environments and people that most individuals walk past without registering. She was not easily rattled. She had sat across from people in the worst moments of their lives and held steady. She was the kind of person who remained calm when everything around her was not. She tells this story with the same steady, precise quality that she brings to her professional work. No embellishment, no dramatic pauses inserted for effect. Just the facts in the order they occurred, with the caveat stated plainly at the start that she knows how it sounds, and she does not expect everyone to believe her. She has long since made her peace with that. It was November. She was driving back from a conference in a city about 4 hours from home. She had planned to make the drive in one stretch, but the conference had run long, and by the time she hit the highway, it was dark, and the forecast was showing a winter storm moving in from the west. She decided to stop for the night rather than risk the roads. She pulled off at a town she did not recognize, a small place that appeared to consist of a gas station, a grain elevator, a diner, and a motel. The motel was called the Lakeview Inn, though as far as Diane could tell, there was no lake visible in any direction. It was a 2-story building, perhaps 30 rooms. The exterior, recently painted a pale yellow color that looked cheerful in the daytime and deeply strange under parking lot lights at night. She went inside. The man at the front desk was young, early 20s, and the interaction was completely unremarkable. She paid, received her keycard, was told she was in room 20 on the second floor, and was given directions to the elevator, which was around the corner, past the vending machines. She rode the elevator to the second floor, found her room, and went inside. The room was clean, better than she had expected. The carpet was relatively new. The bedding was fresh. The bathroom had been recently updated with a tile job that was still a little too bright and too white. The grout not yet stained with the years of use that grout in budget motels eventually collects. She noted all of this because she notes things. It is what she does. She put her bag down, took off her shoes, and went to the window to close the curtains. The window overlooked the parking lot. She could see her car below, and beyond the lot, the dark shape of the grain elevator against the sky. And further beyond that, the first distant flickers of lightning from the approaching storm. She pulled the curtains closed. She turned around, and she stopped. On the desk, in the corner of the room, there was a notebook. Not a motel notebook. Not the kind of small pad with the property logo on the cover that motels sometimes leave for guests to write down their dinner orders or their wake-up call times or their grocery lists. This was a personal notebook, spiral bound, with a dark green cover, the kind you can buy at any office supply store. It was sitting on the desk at a slight angle, as though it had been placed there in a hurry, or perhaps just pushed aside and not moved again. Diane stood looking at it for a moment. Her first thought was that a previous guest had left it behind, and housekeeping had simply not noticed it or not known what to do with it. This was the most obvious explanation, and she held on to it as she crossed the room and looked more closely at the notebook without touching it. The cover had no name on it, no contact information, nothing written on the outside at all. Just the dark green cover and the spiral binding. She thought about calling the front desk. She thought about putting it in the bathroom or on the luggage rack so she would not have to look at it. She thought about ignoring it entirely. Instead, after a long moment, she opened it. The handwriting inside was small and cramped. Not difficult to read, but clearly produced quickly. The letters leaning forward with the urgency of someone writing fast. The pages were dated at the top. The first entry was from 3 weeks before the night Diane was standing in that room. She read the first page. The person who had written the notebook, she gathered from the first entry, was a man. She could not tell his age from the writing. He wrote that he had been staying at the Lakeview Inn for 2 days at the point of that first entry, and that he needed to document what was happening because he was not sure how much longer he would be willing to stay, and he wanted to have a record in case he needed to explain himself to someone later. Diane turned the page. The second entry was from the following day. He wrote that he had woken in the middle of the night. He did not write what time, and found that his room was not as he had left it when he went to sleep. Specifically, he wrote that the chair from the desk chair, had been moved. It had been moved to the center of the room, facing the bed. He wrote that he had not moved it. He was certain he had not moved it. He wrote this 3 times, in 3 slightly different ways. The way people do when they need themselves to be clear about something. He wrote that he had pushed the chair back to the desk and gone back to sleep. He had told himself he must have moved it himself in the night without remembering. He had told himself this had a reasonable explanation. He had almost believed it. Diane turned the page again. The third entry was from 2 days after the second. He wrote that it had happened again. The chair moved to the center of the room, facing the bed, while he slept. He wrote that he had begun leaving a piece of tape on the floor at the base of the chair legs before going to sleep, so that he would know definitively in the morning whether the chair had moved. The tape, in the morning, was on the floor in the corner by the desk. The chair was in the center of the room. He wrote, "I am not doing this myself." Diane stood at that desk, reading those words in a room that had a desk chair, which she now noticed without meaning to. Sitting at a slight angle, not pushed quite flush to the desk. She was aware of this suddenly and sharply. She was also aware that it meant nothing. Housekeeping routinely pushed chairs aside and left them at angles. This was not a detail that meant anything. She kept reading. The fourth entry was longer. He wrote that he had spoken to the front desk about the chair, and that the young man at the desk had looked at him with an expression that he described as careful. Not skeptical, he wrote, not dismissive. Careful. like someone listening for a specific word. He wrote that the young man had asked him which room he was in, and that when he said room 20, the young man had paused before asking if he had experienced anything else unusual. He had said no at the time. He wrote in the notebook that this had been a lie, because there had been something else. Something he had not wanted to say out loud to a stranger at a front desk. He wrote that on his second night at the Lakeview Inn, he had woken at an unknown hour to a sound he could only describe as breathing, not coming from outside the room, not from the corridor, from inside the room, from the space near the window, the corner where the curtains were. Slow and regular and quiet, the way a person breathes when they are standing very still and trying not to be heard. He had lain completely still in the bed and listened. He had not turned on the light. He did not write why he had not turned on the light, except to say that turning on the light had felt, in that moment, like exactly the wrong thing to do. The breathing had stopped after what he estimated was between 2 and 5 minutes. He had waited another full hour before he turned on the lamp. The room was empty. The curtains were still. The corner near the window was exactly as it had been when he had closed the curtains and gone to bed. Diane realized that her own curtains were closed. She realized that she had not looked at the corner by the window since she had closed them. She turned and looked. The corner was empty. Of course it was empty. It was a room corner with the curtain pulled slightly at the base of the wall and nothing else. She turned back to the notebook. There were 4 more entries. She's going to tell you about all of them. The 5th entry was brief. He wrote that he had found a way to confirm his suspicion that the chair was being moved by something other than himself. He had set up his phone to record video throughout the night, propped against his overnight bag facing the room. He wrote that the battery had died sometime in the night, which he had not anticipated, and that he had lost whatever footage might have been recorded. He wrote that in the morning, the chair was again in the center of the room. The 6th entry was written at what he noted was 2 in the afternoon, which he mentioned because he had been unable to sleep past 5 in the morning and had been awake and in the room since then, sitting on the bed with the lights on. He wrote that he did not want to leave the room during the day because leaving meant coming back, and coming back meant walking through the door and not being certain of what was inside before he walked in. He wrote that he had considered checking out and driving home, regardless of his reasons for being in that part of the state in the first place. He wrote that he was still considering it. Then he wrote something that Diane read 3 times. He wrote, "I think it has been here longer than I have. I think it was here before I arrived, and I think it will be here after I leave. I think if I ask the front desk about the history of this room, they will give me that careful look again and not tell me anything. I think that look means they already know. I think a lot of things are being not said in this building, and I'm not sure if knowing any of them would help me or make it worse." The 7th entry was from the following morning. Short. He wrote that the night had passed without incident. The chair had not moved. He had not heard the breathing. He had slept, though not well. He wrote that he was leaving that morning. He had packed his bag and was going to check out. He was writing this last entry because he wanted to leave a record in case someone else came after him. He wanted whoever came after him to know what had happened in room 20. He wrote, If you are reading this in room 20, I am sorry. I do not know what is here. I do not know what it wants. What I can tell you is that it does not like the light. Keep the lights on. Do not sleep in complete darkness. And whatever you do not look too closely at the corner by the window before you go to sleep, because once you start listening for the breathing, you will not be able to stop. That was the last entry. Diane closed the notebook. She stood at the desk for a long moment. Then she picked up the room phone and called the front desk. The same young man who had checked her in answered. She told him she had found a notebook in her room, room 20, that appeared to have been left by a previous guest. She asked if the motel had a lost and found, if she should bring it down. There was a pause on the line. Then the young man asked, "Room 20? "Yes," Diane said. He paused again. "Is everything okay in the room?" he asked. And there it was. That question asked in that careful way, just as the man in the notebook had described it. "Yes," Diane said. "Everything is fine. I just found the notebook." "You can leave it on the desk," the young man said. "Housekeeping will collect it in the morning." Diane thanked him and hung up. She sat on the edge of the bed. She looked at the chair at the desk. She looked at the corner by the window. She looked at the curtains. Then she did something that she says she's still not entirely sure was the right decision. She pulled the desk chair out and positioned it so that its back was against the wall beside the desk, facing out into the room, so that she could see the entire room from the bed without turning her head. She turned on every light in the room, the overhead light, both bedside lamps, the bathroom light. She left the bathroom door open so that the light spilled across the floor. She did not sleep. She sat up in the bed with the reading pillow behind her back and her phone in her hand and every light blazing, and she watched that room until the sky outside the curtains began to change from black to gray to the pale thin light of a winter morning. The chair did not move. She did not hear any breathing. Nothing happened. She checked out at 6 in the morning. The young man at the desk looked at her when she came in and asked if she had slept well. There was nothing unusual in the way he asked it. It was the standard question. But she looked at him for just a moment before answering, and she thought she saw something in his expression. Something that was not quite neutral. Something that was watching her answer a little more closely than the question warranted. "Fine," she said. "Slept fine." He nodded and processed her checkout. She walked out to her car. The storm had passed overnight and left a thin layer of snow on the parking lot, undisturbed except for her own footprints and the tire tracks of one other car that had left some time before her. She got in, started the engine and sat for a moment looking at the building. She looked at the window of room 20 on the second floor. She could not tell from where she was sitting whether the curtains were exactly as she had left them. She decided not to look too carefully. She drove home. Diane did not tell anyone about the notebook for several months. Not because she was ashamed of the experience or embarrassed by it, but because she genuinely did not know how to frame it. Nothing had happened to her. She had found a notebook written by a frightened man in a motel room. She had sat up all night with the lights on because of it. In the cold light of the following days, it seemed almost embarrassing. The kind of story that sounds rational as you lived it, and irrational the moment you try to tell someone else. But she kept thinking about certain things. She kept thinking about the young man's careful question on the phone. She kept thinking about the detail in the notebook, the description of that same careful question asked by that same front desk person to the man who had written the notebook. Is everything okay in the room? Not, is everything okay with you? Not, is the room comfortable? Not the standard hospitality phrasing. Is everything okay in the room? As though the room itself were the subject of concern. As though the room were known to be unreliable. She also kept thinking about the chair. Not because she had seen it move. She had not. Nothing in that room moved while she was in it. Nothing breathed in the corner by the window. Nothing gave her any concrete experience she could point to and say, "There, that happened." But she kept thinking about the fact that she had moved the chair herself, had deliberately repositioned it before she sat up all night, had felt, in doing so, that she was doing the right thing, that having the chair against the wall and facing out into the room was somehow safer than leaving it at the desk with its back to her. She could not entirely account for why she had felt that. Several months after her night at the Lakeview Inn, she began searching for any information about the property. She found very little. The motel had no significant online presence beyond its listings on booking sites and a sparse page on the local Chamber of Commerce website. There were reviews, a moderate number of them, and the ratings were unremarkable. 3 stars average. Most reviews mentioned nothing unusual. A few mentioned that the rooms on the second floor were drafty. One mentioned that the staff seemed friendly but somewhat guarded. None mentioned room 20 specifically. Except one. One review, posted 18 months before Diane's stay, from a user with no profile photo and no other review history, was a single paragraph. The user wrote that they had stayed in a second-floor room and had experienced what they described as a persistent feeling of being watched that had prevented them from sleeping. They wrote that this was not something they had ever experienced in any other motel or hotel in years of travel, and that they were raising it not to damage the property's reputation, but because they felt future guests deserved to be informed. They did not specify which room. They left a 2-star rating, and the comment ended there. Diane reached out through the booking site's messaging system. She sent a brief, carefully worded message explaining that she had also had an unusual experience at the property and was trying to understand if others had shared similar experiences. She asked if the reviewer would be willing to share more detail. She did not expect a response. She received one 4 days later. The reviewer was a man named Paul. He confirmed that he had been in room 20. He had stayed 2 years before Diane's visit and had chosen not to describe the specifics of his experience in the public review because he did not want to sound, in his words, like a lunatic. He told Diane that on his second night in the room, he had woken to find the desk chair positioned in the center of the room, facing his bed. He had returned it to the desk and told himself he had done it himself while sleepwalking, a thing he had never done before in his life, but which seemed preferable to the alternative. The following morning, he had checked out a day early and driven home. He had never spoken about it to anyone. He also told her one additional thing. He told her that the morning he checked out, he had noticed on the desk a small dark green notebook, spiral bound. He had assumed it belonged to a previous guest and had not opened it. He had mentioned it to the front desk when he checked out and the young man behind the desk had said he would have housekeeping collect it. The same notebook in that room. 18 months before Diane arrived. Diane does not know whether the notebook was being found, removed, and returned to the room on a cycle. She does not know whether there were other guests between Paul and the man, whose entries she read, other guests who opened the notebook and added to it or chose not to. She does not know whether the entries she read were written by one man or several, whether the dates in the notebook were accurate, whether any of it maps to verifiable events in the way that would satisfy someone who requires verification. What she knows is that the notebook was in that room, and that whatever was being documented in it had apparently been happening in room 20 for at least 2 years before she stayed there, and that the desk staff at the Lakeview Inn appeared to be aware of it. She wrote a letter to the Lakeview Inn, a formal letter sent by certified mail, asking whether the management was aware of any unusual activity associated with room 20 and whether they had received prior complaints related to that room. She received no response. A follow-up letter also received no response. A third letter, sent 6 weeks after the second, was returned to sender. The address was valid. The motel was still operating. The letter was simply returned. The Lakeview Inn is still operating today. Room 20 is still available for booking. The nightly rate is currently listed at $51, which includes free continental breakfast and free parking. There are no warnings on the listing. There are no notes from management. There is nothing to tell a guest arriving at that room on a dark November night with a winter storm approaching that there is a notebook on the desk that they should or should not open. We do not know what is in room 20 of the Lakeview Inn. We do not know what moved the chair. We do not know what breathed in the corner by the window on those nights. We do not know what the young man at the front desk knows, or what he has been told about that room, or what arrangement, if any, has been made between the management and whatever occupies that space. What we know is that Diane sat up all night with every light in the room blazing and drove away at 6 in the morning and has not stopped thinking about it since. Now, let us take a step back from these 3 stories and think about them together. Because individually, they are frightening, but together, they form a pattern that is worth sitting with. In Marcus's story, the thing in room 8 wanted entry. It knocked, it asked, it waited. It did not force anything. It simply repeated its invitation into the darkness and waited for someone to accept it. Marcus did not accept. He left. And the thing in room 8, whatever it was, remained. It is perhaps still there, behind a door that no longer has a number on it, in a room that officially does not exist, asking the same question into the same wall. Please come in. In Jamie and Cora's story, the thing in room 12 did not ask for anything. It did not knock or speak. It simply was. It had been in that room before they arrived. It was visible in their photograph before they checked in. It stood in the window as they drove away. It did not seem to want anything from them specifically. It seemed to simply exist in that space with a patience that was more disturbing than any aggression would have been. It was not waiting for them. It was just there, the way furniture is just there, the way the walls are just there. And it would continue to be just there for whoever came next and whoever came after that. In Diane's story, the thing in room 20 did not want to be seen. It was careful. It operated at the edges of perception. Move in a chair while she slept, breathing in a corner while she lay still, never doing anything that could be definitively proven. Always maintaining just enough deniability to make you question yourself. It had been careful enough that guest after guest had stayed in that room and told themselves rational explanations and driven away and mostly kept quiet about it. It had been operating in that room, patient and precise and just barely visible for years. 3 different entities, 3 different approaches, 3 different things that budget motels apparently have in common. There is a reason, perhaps, why these things accumulate in budget motels specifically. Think about the nature of those places. Think about what they are and what they are not. They are not homes. Nobody claims them. Nobody loves them in the way you love a place that is yours. The guests cycle through on an endless conveyor, each one present for 1 night or 2 nights or a week at most, none of them invested, none of them paying close enough attention. The staff are often transient too, high turnover, people working a job that is a means to an end. The management is focused on margins. The buildings themselves are often old, maintained to the minimum standard required to keep the lights on and the rooms rented. These are places that exist in a kind of permanent in-between state, not fully inhabited and not fully empty, not maintained with love and not entirely abandoned, not home to anyone and not unknown to everyone, just perpetually between things. And it is in the between spaces, the threshold spaces, that certain kinds of things are said to find their footholds. Every culture has a version of this idea. The space between sleeping and waking, the hour between midnight and dawn, the corridor between one room and another, the moment between one thing ending and another beginning. These are the spaces where the rules of ordinary experience become thinner, where what is normally kept separate becomes less separate, where what is usually invisible becomes briefly almost visible. Budget motels are architectures of the in-between. They were built to be passed through. They were designed for transience. And perhaps something about that, something about the sheer accumulated weight of people passing through without ever settling, without ever fully arriving, creates a kind of thinness in those walls. A thinness that something can knock through. A thinness that something can stand in a window and stare through. A thinness that something can breathe through in the dark, while you lie still and wonder if you're imagining it. We are not telling you not to stay in budget motels. Most of them are exactly what they appear to be. Slightly worn places offering cheap sleep between 2 points on a journey. Nothing more. Nothing that will follow you home. But the next time you're in a budget motel room, the next time you're lying on that slightly too firm mattress in that slightly too dark room listening to the sounds the building makes around you, the creak of the floor in the corridor outside, the hum of the vending machine somewhere down the hall, the rattle of the ice machine, the thin sound of the heating unit kicking in. The next time you're in that room, and it is 3 in the morning, and something wakes you, before you open your eyes, before you reach for the lamp, before you look at the wall or the window or the chair in the corner, ask yourself honestly, do you actually want to know what is there? Because Marcus asked and he drove away. And Diane asked and she sat up all night and drove away at dawn. And Jamie and Cora asked and the answer is still in a photograph on Cora's phone that she cannot bring herself to delete and cannot bring herself to look at directly. Some questions, once you start asking them, do not stop. Some rooms, once you have slept in them, stay with you. Some things, once they know you have heard them knocking, remember your name. Keep your lights on tonight.